We did want to start with just a moment of silence for George Floyd and all the other victims of racial violence in this country, of which there are many. So please do join me for a moment of silence.
Preparing for this conversation, it was very much around this idea of like, well, now what? Like, now what are we doing? Now what is this demographic? What are white women doing, not doing, going back to their Netflix series and their, spin classes? How are we continuing to hold ourselves to account what it is that we're doing with our institutions that in some cases have built DEI departments and hired amazing talent to push the conversation, have committed large chunks of money, but it's a little bit like, well, now we actually have to do the work. Right.
Just stand around. Don't just stand around. All we want to do is be free. All we want to do is be free. All we want to do is take the chains off.
That was J. Cole, AKA one of the most important artists of our generation. Initial thoughts.
Got a pit in my stomach.
Michelle, tell me why. Why is there a pit in your stomach?
The idea of, taking the chains off and just how there are just so many systems that are in place that still have to be dismantled. There's just so many obstacles. And, that's, I think, where the pit is coming from. That there's still so much to do.
Given the events of the past 2 years, it's also worth reflecting on how much has to happen for this country to find a murderer of a Black man guilty, a police officer of a Black man guilty. Like, so much went into producing this verdict for what should just be justice.
So this is a visual I like to use called the Genderbread Person. It's available at genderbread.org, created by Sam Killerman. It kind of explains the different aspects of a person. There's gender identity, gender expression, anatomical or biological sex, sexual attraction and romantic attraction, and none of these things are the same as any of the others. None of them necessarily determines any of the others. There is a ton of information on this website if you want to take a look at any point, but they're all of these aspects of the person are independent of each other and not necessarily connected.
I specifically remember being one of the few Black students, and then you cut it even deeper, being one of the few Black males within psychology coursework. One of the things that I noticed was really interesting is that we never really talked about the intersections of race and mental health. I had to seek out sociology courses, gender and women's studies courses, to really get that other aspect of, what I wanted out of my college experience.
For me, I guess that is the loneliness and the cultural shock is like predominantly something that, and if COVID hadn't hit, maybe by now, a lot of us, or me personally, I would have become accustomed to all this. But now with COVID, I can't get into contact with like a lot of people. I was starting to make new friends.
Something that stood out to me was how cognizant I was of how I presented in class. I made sure that when I came to class, I used my best standard English. I wanted to make sure that my diction was appropriate. I was using proper English, which I think is a problematic statement, but using the most standard English that I could access at the time, because I wanted to make sure that everyone knew that I was smart and that I got here because I was smart and not because of affirmative action. Which
is something that's impacting every person, but especially Black individuals and persons of color. I think that I've been thinking a lot about recently as a white person, notably as a white male, you know, how I'm feeling. I'm aware of my anger, but I think I'm also tuning in more to the shame underneath that that's frequently there. And I think that's associated with governments and institutions, their policies, procedures that continue to render people, notably Black people, invisible. I also think that I believe that the journey to becoming aware of one's privilege, notably one's white privilege, is something that you spend a lifetime doing. It's work every day.
I wanted to share that when I started graduate school, I naively believed that therapy would be enough to help people solve most of their problems, and then quickly learned that many psychological problems are really the result of systemic failures, and that systemic problems really require systemic solutions. So I am always eager to learn more about how I, as a psychologist and as a human in the world, can really use my expertise and privilege to challenge and dismantle the systems of oppression in which marginalized groups are embedded. And that includes groups that I personally identify with as well as others.